The music in the trendy downtown bar throbbed, a relentless pulse designed to necessitate leaning in close, a calculated intimacy. My beer, forgotten, had long since lost its chill, the condensation on the glass already dried to faint rings on the polished wood. Haley, wearing the black dress I'd told her looked amazing just hours before, leaned across the bar, her laughter tinkling above the din, absorbed by whatever Tyler, the bartender with the confident smirk and sleeve tattoos, was whispering. For months, a loose thread had tugged at the edges of my understanding. Tonight, as I watched her, it tightened. She was beaming, a genuine, unburdened joy that felt alien to moments we shared. Her eyes, briefly, met mine, and she smiled, a fleeting, almost mischievous expression, before turning back to Tyler. It was in that instant, with the glint of the engagement ring I'd spent 6 months saving for catching the bar lights on her finger, that she slipped a cocktail napkin into her purse. The movement was deliberate, unhurried, as if daring me to react, or perhaps, simply not caring if I noticed at all. Ryan, my friend, sat across from me. His phone was held up, a transparent shield, his gaze subtly tracking the same unfolding scene. He was doing his best impression of someone lost in their feed, but I knew him too well. He was watching, waiting, probably wondering if the ground was about to give way beneath us. For years. 8 months engaged. A wedding venue booked with a non-refundable $12,000 deposit. None of it seemed to matter when faced with a man who could muddle herbs and craft artisanal bitters with a performative flourish. Haley had been on her phone all evening, even before we'd arrived. A subtle smile played on her lips, the screen angled carefully away when my glance strayed. It was the familiar, uncomfortable dance of someone texting messages best kept private, believing their partner too oblivious to notice. When we'd walked in, she'd bypassed the tables, making a beeline for the bar, a sudden, almost frantic enthusiasm for signature drinks from someone who usually settled for a vodka soda. I'd brushed it off then, just another anomaly in a string of recent oddities. You make excuses for people you love, whisper reassurances to yourself about paranoia, cling to the good times, convinced it's just a phase. Tyler was exactly as expected, mid-20s, a neat man bun, an arm covered in ink, and that practiced, confident ease of a man who knew he commanded attention. He mixed her drink slowly, meticulously, a ballet of muddled herbs and infused syrups that stretched into an eternity. She absorbed every second of his performance. Ryan finally lowered his phone, catching my eye with a silent question, "We can leave." I shook my head, a quiet determination settling in my chest. I needed to see this through. How far would it go? The answer arrived about 10 minutes later. Tyler slid a fresh cocktail napkin across the bar. Haley giggled, a sound too young for her 28 years, and tucked it into her purse with a lack of discretion that spoke volumes. Either she genuinely believed I couldn't see her from 15 feet away, or she simply didn't care. It was then that I stood, moving toward the bar, not to escalate, but because the pretense had become too heavy to carry. I hadn't quite reached her when Haley spun around. "What? Are you checking up on me now?" Her voice, defensive and sharp, sliced through the bar noise. It was a confirmation, a final, undeniable piece clicking into place. I kept my voice level, refusing the bait. "I'm ready to go." She rolled her eyes so dramatically I half expected her to strain something. "I'm having fun, Mason. Go sit down." The words felt like a dismissal from a parent to a child, not from a fiancé to the man she was to marry in 4 months. Tyler, to his credit, looked suddenly uncomfortable, retreating to busied glass washing. "I'm leaving," I repeated, my voice steady. "You can come or not. Your choice." She responded, loud enough that the couple at the next table certainly heard. "You're not my husband. You don't own me." The words hung in the air, echoing. For a second, the entire bar seemed to pause, as if a cosmic hand had hit a mute button. I didn't yell. I didn't argue. I just looked at her, those 5 seconds stretching into an hour, before I said, "You're right about one of those things." Then I turned and walked away. Ryan was already grabbing his jacket, tossing cash onto the table. His movements were quick, efficient, the unmistakable cue of a friend who'd been waiting for permission to exit. Haley's voice followed me, something about me being controlling and insecure, but the words were already fading as I pushed through the heavy door. The cool night air hit my face, the first real breath I'd taken in hours. Ryan caught up a half block down, falling into step beside me without a word. The 3-minute walk to my car felt like a slow-motion montage, for years of our relationship flashing through my mind. Every sweet memory, every shared laugh, now carried a strange, bitter aftertaste. I'd met her at a friend's barbecue, a perfect summer day where the world felt open and endless. She'd laughed at my joke about potato salad, and I'd thought she was the most beautiful person I'd ever seen. The first year had been amazing. The second, good. The third, with its bumps, had seemed normal, just part of the journey. But this past year? It had been a relentless exercise in making excuses for the growing distance, convincing myself it was just the stress of wedding planning. When we reached my car, Ryan finally broke the silence. "So, what are you going to do?" I surprised myself by knowing the answer immediately. "I need your truck." He asked, "When?" "Tonight," I said. He handed me his keys, no further questions, the silent understanding of true friendship. He'd meet me at my place in an hour, he said, then called an Uber. I drove back to the apartment I'd shared with Haley for 2 years, parking in my usual spot. I sat in the car for 10 minutes, the silence amplifying the weight of the decision. The apartment, a third-floor unit in a converted warehouse with exposed brick and big windows, the kind of place that looked incredible on Instagram and cost far too much, suddenly felt foreign. My name was on the lease, my credit score, my security deposit. I climbed the stairs, knowing it would be one of the last times, and unlocked the door to what was no longer home. Everything inside looked different, starkly defined, as if I were seeing it for the first time. The couch I'd bought with my first real job. The coffee table I'd assembled at 2 a.m. The TV I'd saved for. The kitchen knives, a birthday gift from my parents. The espresso machine I'd researched for 3 weeks. A mental inventory revealed perhaps 80% of it was mine, purchased, chosen, assembled by me. Haley's contributions were sparse, decorative pillows, a few plants I watered, and a collection of framed photos of us that now felt like evidence in a case against my own judgment. My phone buzzed with texts I didn't read. Probably Haley, still at the bar with Tyler, wondering where I'd gone. Ryan arrived precisely on schedule. He didn't ask questions, simply pulled the hand truck from his backseat and said, "Where do we start?" We worked with the quiet intensity of a heist, except we were reclaiming my own life, piece by piece. The couch went first, then the TV, the coffee table, the kitchen essentials, my clothes, my books, everything down to the last charging cable and coffee mug. In 3 hours, the apartment was stripped bare, leaving only Haley's few belongings and the unit's built-in furniture. What remained looked profoundly sad. I saved one thing for last. At the empty kitchen counter, I sat down with a piece of paper and a pen. The words flowed, the most honest I'd spoken in months. Asterisk, you're right. I don't own you, and you don't owe my paycheck either. Asterisk, I left the note in the center of the stark, empty counter, where she couldn't miss it. One last look around, and I walked out. Ryan locked up behind me. I slid my key under the door. As we loaded the last box, he asked where I was going. "I'll figure it out," I said. He offered his couch until I did. Driving away from that apartment at almost 2 a.m., I felt lighter than I had in a year. Around 4 a.m., as I lay on Ryan's couch, unable to sleep, my phone began to explode. Missed calls and texts, a relentless barrage I didn't answer. 37 missed calls before I finally put it on silent. I stared at the ceiling, my brain replaying the last year like a detective sifting through case files, searching for clues I'd missed. Red flags. They only become obvious when you finally stop making excuses for them. And I had been a master of excuses. It started perhaps 6 months ago. Happy hours that stretched into late nights. Haley rolling in at 11 or midnight, the faint scent of bar olives and cheap wine clinging to her. Traffic, a coworker's birthday, plausible stories that held up only if you avoided scrutinizing them too closely. I'd wanted to believe her, because that's what love demanded, didn't it? The benefit of the doubt, even when that doubt was doing backflips, waving crimson banners. Then, the Instagram posts from unfamiliar apartments, group photos where she was always just a little too close to men whose names I didn't know. Captions about living her best life that felt like they were written by someone who'd forgotten her engagement. I'd asked once, casually, and she'd deployed the paranoia card, her tone making me feel like the problem for simply noticing. 3 months ago, her phone became a fortress. A new passcode. Screens tilted away when notifications chimed. Calls taken in another room, as if she were handling classified information. She'd begun taking off her engagement ring before going out, claiming it got in the way of dancing, or simply didn't match her outfit. Each excuse, on its own, seemed reasonable. Piled together, they formed an increasingly unreasonable picture. But it was the financial aspect that truly resonated when I finally sat down, the morning after moving out, and looked at the numbers. I made a stable $90,000 as a project manager. Haley, $35,000 part-time. I'd never cared about the income difference, relationships weren't supposed to be about money. Except, somewhere along the way, it had become precisely that, though not on any terms I'd agreed to. I covered 70% of the rent, about $1,400 a month, to her $600. All utilities, internet, streaming, most groceries, and dinners out, because she was saving for the wedding. I'd already put down the venue deposit, paid for her dress, and planned to cover the honeymoon. I opened my Venmo history. 10 minutes passed in a blur as I scrolled through transactions spanning 2 years. A financial diary of a relationship where I had seemingly been the sole investor. One payment, from a month ago, for $50, with a note, for emotional labor. At the time, I'd dismissed it as a joke. Now, it felt like a chilling preview. The math, once I compiled it in a spreadsheet on Ryan's kitchen table, a project manager's instinct in crisis, was stark. 28 months of covering her shortfall. $2,500 in direct loans, promised repayment after the wedding. Another $1,800 for things I'd bought for us that only she used. I took screenshots, organized folders, meticulously documented everything, creating a paper trail that would make an accountant weep. Ryan emerged from his bedroom around 9, took one look at me surrounded by statements, and silently started the coffee. Over that coffee, the plan solidified, clear and simple. Documentation. Not for the money itself, but because I knew what was coming. Haley wouldn't accept rejection quietly. She'd construct a narrative where I was the villain. I needed proof. Timestamps. Records. Evidence that I wasn't abandoning her, but extracting myself from a situation where I'd become little more than a walking ATM. The rest of my things remained at the apartment, clothes, books, forgotten odds and ends. I texted the landlord, framing the situation professionally, requesting a lease break and offering to cover the costs. He responded within an hour, stating he'd seen this before, and asked if I wanted him to change the locks. Not yet, I replied. I needed my remaining things first, but appreciated the offer. Ryan and I returned that afternoon, knowing Haley would be at work. I used my key for the last time. The apartment, in daylight, looked even more desolate, like a stage after the final curtain, props already being dismantled. I left her the cheap, wobbly bookshelf, her decorative pillows, the photos of us I no longer wanted, and a lamp with a broken switch I'd always meant to fix. On her nightstand, like a perverse trophy, lay the cocktail napkin with Tyler's number. I felt nothing, merely took a photo for my records, and left it there. We were in and out in 40 minutes, efficient and thorough. I locked the door, knowing I would never open it again. My social media accounts went dark, logged out, not deleted. I had no desire to witness the narrative being constructed about my supposed abandonment. Ryan ordered pizza. We watched basketball, the comfortable silence between us a testament to a friendship that understood words would only be noise. 18 hours after Haley came home to that empty apartment, the counterattack began. My work email chimed. A message from Jennifer in HR, a casual request for a minute to chat, the undertone signaling that something official had been flagged. I walked into her office knowing precisely what awaited me. Jennifer looked uncomfortable, clicking her pen a few times before asking if I wanted to explain my side. I pulled out my phone. The folder I'd prepared. The lease with only my name. Receipts for every piece of furniture. The Venmo history. Bank statements. The timeline of the last 6 months. She reviewed it all for 10 minutes, her expression shifting from professional neutrality to a faint sympathy. The company has no concerns, she finally said, apologizing for the inquiry. Haley tried the police next. A report about stolen property. It went nowhere. The same documentation I'd shown HR was sufficient. The officer, sounding bored, described it as a civil matter, advising me to keep my records. Then came the Facebook post. Haley's nuclear option, once official channels failed. A lengthy essay detailing emotional mistreatment and financial control, a partner who'd isolated her and left her with nothing. She painted herself as a victim of calculated manipulation, a narrative that might have been convincing had one not known the actual facts. She tagged mutual friends, using phrases clearly Googled for maximum impact. Within the hour, it had 40 likes. Comments from her friends poured in, professing they'd always known something was off, offering support and resources. I sat in Ryan's living room, watching the narrative build, feeling not anger, but a profound weariness, like watching someone dig a hole unaware I already had a ladder out of it. Ryan asked if I'd respond. No, I told him. I'd do something better. He made his own post. Simple. Factual. He'd been at the bar. He'd seen what happened. He'd helped me move my own belongings out of my own apartment. Anyone interested in the full story could message him directly. Then, he posted screenshots. Not all, just enough. The Venmo requests. The lease agreement. Texts from Haley asking for money. The financial reality of who had supported whom. Her narrative didn't just crack, it shattered. The supportive comments quickly morphed into unanswerable questions. 3 days later, Robert, Haley's father, called me. A man I'd always respected. He'd seen everything online. He wanted to hear my version directly. We met at a downtown coffee shop, neutral territory. I brought printed copies of everything. He looked through it all, asked a few clarifying questions, then leaned back in his chair, the expression of a man realizing his daughter had become a stranger. Robert said he'd raised her better, apologized for the chaos, and asked what he could do. I mentioned the lease penalty. He wrote me a check for the full amount on the spot, shook my hand, and left looking 10 years older. The conversation with Haley happened 2 weeks after that. Not by choice. She ambushed me at the coffee shop near Ryan's place where I'd started working mornings. She looked different, tired, less put together than the girl who'd flirted with a bartender while wearing my ring. She sat down opposite me without asking, launched into a rehearsed speech about working things out, mistakes on both sides, how 4 years meant something, and we shouldn't throw it all away over one bad night. I let her finish, didn't interrupt. When she was done, I asked her one question. Did she remember what she'd told her friend about why she was marrying me? Her face went pale. She knew exactly what I was talking about. A month before the bar incident, over mimosas with her best friend, she'd gotten too honest. She was marrying me because it was easier than starting over. Because I was stable, safe, and would take care of her, even if the spark was gone. Her friend, racked with guilt, had sent me screenshots after everything blew up, believing I deserved to know. I told Haley the wedding was cancelled. The deposits lost. The relationship over. Nothing she said would change those facts. She tried anger then, accusing me of being vindictive and cruel, of ruining her reputation. I reminded her I'd posted nothing, told my side only when she tried to destroy me first. I told her she had done this to herself, and I was simply declining to be collateral damage in her victim story. She left crying. I went back to my coffee, feeling nothing but a profound relief that this particular conversation was finally behind me. Life moved on, faster than I expected. Within a month, I found a new apartment, a one-bedroom, affordable, mine alone, with no ghosts of a failed relationship haunting the furniture. I started hitting the gym again, an activity I'd let slide during the engagement planning, remembering what it felt like to invest in myself rather than pouring everything into someone who saw me as a resource. 3 months later, I met someone new. Nothing serious yet, just coffee and conversation with a woman who paid for her own drinks and didn't check her phone every 5 minutes. The call came 6 months after I'd moved out. Haley's number on my screen. I'd unblocked it a few weeks prior, thinking enough time had passed. She was crying. Real, ragged sobs that made her words barely discernible. She'd messed everything up, she said, and needed help. Tyler had vanished after a month, realizing she came with complications and expectations. Her friends had distanced themselves after the truth surfaced. Her parents kept her at arm's length, clearly disappointed. The real kicker, though, was the debt. $25,000 racked up on credit cards trying to maintain the lifestyle she'd been accustomed to when I was covering 70% of her expenses. Plus, she'd had to take over full rent on the apartment. For 2 months after I left, she asked for a loan, just enough to get back on her feet. She promised to pay it back. I was the only person she could turn to. I thought about it for perhaps 10 seconds. Every Venmo request. Every late night she'd blamed on happy hour. Every instant she'd made me feel crazy for noticing the obvious. Then I told her I would help, but only under very specific conditions. She would sign a legal promissory note for any amount I sent, with a payment plan of $50 a month until the debt was cleared. And she would acknowledge, in writing, that this was repayment for the $2,500 in loans she'd never returned, plus interest for emotional damages. She agreed immediately, desperate enough to accept any terms, likely thinking I'd send her thousands. I sent her exactly $50. The note attached read, month 1 of 50, it would take her just over 4 years to repay the original loans she'd promised back after the wedding that never happened. Not a penny more, not a penny less. Just a monthly reminder that actions had prices, and I wasn't paying hers anymore. She tried calling back, sent texts saying that wasn't what she meant, that she needed real help, but I had already said everything I needed to say. A week later, I sold the engagement ring, getting about 60% of what I'd paid. I used the money to book a trip to Japan, a journey I'd always wanted to take but had postponed for wedding planning. The first payment of $50 hit my account right on schedule. How do you reconcile the past with a suddenly clearer vision of what was always there?